Okay, once again, we'll turn to Matthew chapter 7. Again, last week, looking at verse 12, we see that the Sermon on the Mount life is a life that regards others. Matthew 7, verse 12, "Therefore, all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets." Notice again, by way of review, the words ye, that's ourselves. The word men, that's others. Then you come to you and ye, again, that's ourselves. And then you see them, and that, of course, is others. There are many things in life, whether it be the saved life or the life of a lost person. There are many things in life that are going to happen with regard to ourselves and to others. You cannot live this life without being affected by others and without others being affected by us. And what is stated here is a Christ principle to regulate, to govern our behavior toward others. We have little to no control over what others do to us or don't do, but there are principles that are to regulate and to govern our behavior, our reactions toward others. And what Christ says here really goes against what we are by nature. Instinctively, we are selfish. That's true of everyone. We're selfish creatures, instinctively, by nature. That's what we are. This, as we saw last week, is verse 12, is an application statement. We see that from the opening word, therefore. And it serves as we saw last week, it serves as a preventative to what he addressed in verses 1 through 5. That is, unjust judgment of others, harsh judgment of others, a critical spirit. What Christ says here, of course, would prevent that. No one wants to be judged. No one wants to be the victim of a critical spirit. So verse 12 is the application. But it's also, the word therefore introduces the basis of this principle. Therefore means, of course, that what was said before, or what is said now, is based upon what was previously said. So verse 12 is based upon what was previously said. And that would take you to verses 7 through verse 11. And what Christ taught there. And the truths that are stated there is God is good to us, his children. God will not harm his children. God helps his children. God deals bountifully with us. God is gracious. God is merciful toward us. In other words, what we read in those verses is God does not deal with us according to what we deserve. None of us would be here if He dealt with us that way. God does not deal with us according to what we deserve. God does not deal with us strictly based upon our behavior. Again, none of us would be here if that were the case. So that's a quick summary of what he states in the previous verses. And then we come to this. Therefore, because of who God is, because of the way God deals with us, therefore, all things whatsoever ye would that men should do unto you, do ye even so to them. So, God gives us good things in spite of ourselves. God gives us good things in spite of who we are. Again, that's true of all of us. He sees us not through the lens of our faults, our shortcomings, our sins. He sees us through the eyes of a loving Father. And He looks upon us with grace and mercy. So what He's saying here is, you deal with others like that. You deal with others as I deal with you. In other words, do not merely see the offensive. People have that tendency. Someone says something, someone does something that offends. The tendency of human nature is all focus is now upon that. Can't see anything else. And they become obsessed with what has offended them. The reason is because we are, again, instinctively self-centered. How dare someone offend me? So we get stuck upon what we take, and we may have taken it wrong. A lot of times people get offended, and there was no offense intended, but they get offended, and they're bitter the rest of their lives because of that. So he's saying, do not merely see the offensive in others, which goes back to the first 5 verses, that critical spirit. But he's saying, instead of just seeing that which offends, look at them as I have looked upon you. We offend God every day. We offend God, but you don't even have to do anything. We offend God just by who we are. The things that go through our minds. We offend God. So what he's saying here in verse 12, again, is basically look at others as I have looked upon you. So it is really a call. If you take the therefore back to what he taught in verses 7 through 11, verse 12 is really a call to imitate God. To imitate how God treats us. So the therefore takes us back to God's dealing with us. So what is stated in verse 12 is a precept that takes us back to God. So, the basis of what we read here in verse 12 is not what others do. That's not the basis. The basis is God dealing with us in grace and mercy. That's the basis of the principle. And God deals with us in grace and mercy every single day. Therefore, all things, whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. So it is in this fact, the fact that the precept takes us back to God, God's dealing with us. This is where we find the key to obeying verse 12. We do not naturally obey verse 12. But what he's saying with that opening, therefore, taking us back to God's dealing with us, he is telling us, don't start with others. Don't start with the behavior of others towards you. Start with God. That's the key. Start with God. And that's a biblical principle that is true to everything. Start with God. That is the biblical principle for everything in our lives. Just start with God. Start with God. God is to be the starting point. In dealing with, reacting to others, if you start with them, say they do something offensive, they do you wrong. If you start with that, that's where you're going to get stuck. Start with God. Start with God. Start with how God deals with us. We offend God. But how does God deal with us? When it comes to dealing with others, again, we normally will either start in one of two places. We start with ourselves, or we start with what the other person has done or hasn't done. That's where we start. And as a result, our treatment and our reaction to others has its basis either in ourselves or what they have done. That becomes the basis of how we treat others. But the opening, therefore, takes us back to God. So when it comes to others, start with God. And the Bible teaches us that. Notice in Romans chapter 15, Luke chapter 6. Luke 6, verse 36. Be ye therefore merciful, as your Father also is merciful. What's he saying? Start with God. God's merciful to you, start there. And be merciful to others. In Romans 15, verse 7. Wherefore receive ye one another. Now this is church capacity, but it applies. Has Christ also received us to the glory of God? Christ has received us. Were we perfect when we were received by Christ? Were we without fault? Of course not. We were rebels, yet we were received by Him. Start there. God has received us. So rather than starting with others, start there. Rather than start with ourselves, well, I've been offended. They did me wrong. You're starting at the wrong point. Start with God. God received us. And He says, based upon that, receive others. Well, they're not worthy to be received. Exactly. And neither were we. Start with the Lord. Ephesians chapter 4. I keep saying Romans. Ephesians chapter 4. Verse 32. Well, let's read verse 31 as well. Let all bitterness, and that's what we become when we start with ourselves or start with the behavior of others. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. In replace of that, be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving. 3 things: kind, tender-hearted, forgiving. What's this based on? Even as God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you. So again, if you start with ourselves or we start with the other person, we will justify our bitterness. We will justify our wrath. We will justify our anger. We're very good at that. We can always justify our anger and justify the evil speaking and all of that. But when you start with God, again, has God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. That's where we're to start. And that's how we obey verse 12. So God is gracious and merciful to us. That is the basis of Matthew 7, verse 12. The basis is not ourselves. The basis is not others. The basis is God. Now think of God's grace and mercy. God's grace and mercy are related concepts, but they are distinct, as we've pointed out many times. God in grace gives us what we do not deserve. God in mercy withholds from us what we do deserve. So yes, they are related concepts, but they are different. But think about it. God's grace, when God bestows grace upon us, He gives us what we do not deserve. Because people will often say, well, I have a right to be angry. I have a right to feel this way. I have a right to treat them this way. Now just think about that. God, when He bestows a blessing upon us, does He not have the right and the power to withhold that blessing? Yes, He does. He has every right. God has every right to withhold every blessing from us. He has that right. He does not exercise all His rights. Think about God's mercy. He withholds from us what we deserve. God, in His mercy, does He have the right to punish us? Yes, He does. Does He have the right to punish us every time we are not aligned with Him? Yes, He does. Does He have a right to punish us every time our thought process is contrary to Him? Yes, He does. Does He have the power to exercise that right? Yes, He does. But does He? No, He doesn't. Again, if He did, we wouldn't be here. We're all living testimonies that God is gracious, that God is merciful. So someone could argue, well, I have the right to feel this way. Let's say you're right. Let's say that's true. That doesn't mean it's right to feel that way. Well, I have the right to treat them this way. Well, you really don't, but let's say even if that were so, it doesn't align with what Christ is teaching here. So again, let's look at the extent of the precept. And before we do, I want to say our right is not the issue. Well, I have the right. Our right is not the issue. Well, I have a right to be angry. That's not the issue. The issue is what the Lord would have us to do. That's the issue. It's not an issue of our rights. Because people think they have rights that they don't have. So that's not the issue. That complicates everything. So consider the extent of this precept. How far does this go? Well, it's seen in the words, all things whatsoever. Therefore, all things whatsoever. All things whatsoever. Those three words give us the extent of this precept. Treat others as you would want to be treated in all things whatsoever, is what it's saying. In all things whatsoever. I believe that covers everything. All things whatsoever. So the rule is really as broad as our life. That's how broad the rule is. Therefore, all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. Now this goes beyond simply meeting the needs of others. It is a precept that deals with day-to-day interaction with people around us. It is a life precept. It is applicable to our public life. It is applicable to our work life, school life, church life, home life. It's applicable to all those things, all those places. So it is a precept that is applicable to wherever there are others. Wherever they are, this is the precept. This is what is to govern our behavior. So, consider just the basics of the precept. What does it require of us? Well, it requires some thought. Again, therefore all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you. So it requires some thought. How do I want to be treated? We each have enough regard for ourselves to know when a kindness is shown to us. And we also know when an injury has been done. And we also know when a wrong has been done to us. how do we want to be treated? That requires thought. Now, most people, and I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say most, it's what we are by nature. Most people think they ought to be treated probably better than they ought to think. And they don't think the same toward others. So, notice the word should. Therefore, all things whatsoever ye would that men should do. It's not, that's a very important word. It's not whatsoever ye would that men do to you, but what they should do. So that means everybody has a responsibility. I have a responsibility to treat others correctly. They have a responsibility to do the same. But what if they don't? Which happens often. So we need to give some thought. How do we think we should be treated? And let's say, okay, you've got this in your mind, and most people do. Most people have it in their mind how they should be treated in every situation. That's in your thought process. Now, what happens when how they should treat you, what your expectation is? Does not this verse teach us that we have expectations of others? We have expectations of how we should be treated. In any area of our life, we have those expectations. So what happens when those expectations are not met? Do we now have the right to do unto them? No, we're to treat them as we wish they would have treated us, as they should do unto you. They failed. They did not treat us up to our expectations. Some people need to lower their expectations. They have too high of an opinion of themselves. They need to lower their expectations. But they fail to meet our expectations. Does that undo verse 12? No, not at all. Not at all, because we're to treat them as they should have treated us. So the precept requires some thought. How do we expect to be treated? Some people, they'll come into a church building and they expect everyone in that building to treat them a certain way. And if everyone in that building, it just takes one, does not treat them in that expected way, well, I'm not coming back. But here's how that should work. I'm going to go back and I'm going to treat them as I thought I should have been treated. But that's not human nature. But that's what he's teaching. That's what he's teaching here. Well, I wasn't treated right by so-and-so, therefore no, you're to come back and you're to do what you think they should have done to you, rather than holding on to that for the rest of your life. And that's what people do. So also notice the precept requires action. That is seen in the words, do ye. Do ye. Don't just think about it. Do it. Well, I thought about doing such and such for them. Do it. Do ye. To truly follow what Christ says here requires that we do not merely think about what they would like others to do, and that's where a lot of people get stuck. They're stuck on thinking, this is what I want others to do to me. This is how I want to be treated. But they never get past that thought. Well, however you think others are to treat you, you're to do. You're to do. You're to carry it out. So the doing, of course, we must say this, must be within the realm of what is pleasing and acceptable to God. The doing cannot be contrary to Scripture. So, if I'm drunk and I would expect someone to bring me another bottle of liquor, then that's what I should do to them if they're in the same. No, that goes contrary to Scripture. So there are boundaries. Then think of the degree and direction of the precept. Do ye even so to them? To them. Doesn't matter what they've done. That's not the issue. The words even so, that line goes back to what we think they should do toward us. Even so. That means exactly or precisely as you think they should treat you. Everybody thinks they should be treated with respect. Everybody thinks that. And even so, exactly and precisely, do the same to others. So the precept is, whatever you desire that others would do for you, do exactly and precisely to and for them. Now notice over in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verses 21 and 22. Also take no heed, that is, give no attention unto all words that are spoken, lest thou hear thy servant curse thee. For oftentimes also thine own heart knoweth that thou thyself likewise hast cursed others. I believe what those two verses are saying is, don't be overly affected when others speak evil of you. For you know that you're guilty of the same. It lines up with Matthew 7:12. We're guilty. Don't treat others as they treat you. Treat others as you want to be treated. So the direction is to them. We are to do. The object of the action is them. And there's nothing to qualify in verse 12 the them. Nothing to qualify. Nothing at all. It is simply them. That's it. We must, at a minimum, put others, in order to obey verse 12, we must, at a minimum, put others upon the level with ourselves. You have to do that if you're going to obey verse 12. That is, that person's just as good as you. Philippians says we're to think others better than ourselves. But at a minimum, to obey Matthew 7:12, you have to put others at your level. They're not below you. They're not, they've done to obey verse 12. You, again, at a minimum, have to put them on the same level as yourselves. So, we're not to wait for others, the them, to determine what we are going to do toward them. We're to simply take the initiative. We know how we want to be treated. There isn't anybody here that doesn't know how they want to be treated by everybody. You have those expectations, how you think you should be treated. And again, most have an overestimation of that. But for those who have an overestimation of that, then however serious, to whatever degree that overestimation is, that's what they're to do to others. So the duty and responsibility is not dependent upon others. It's not dependent on the them. It's dependent upon the ye and the you. And the emphasis of Matthew 7 verse 12 is not upon the action or the character of the them. It is upon the ye and the you. There's no way you can get around that in reading Matthew 7:12. The emphasis is on the ye and you. So any failure in this duty, it's not due to them. It's due to the ye and the you. It's due to us. Because they're not the base, they're not the standard. So Matthew 7 verse 12, really it's being others focused. Rather than being self-focused, be others focused. Be others focused. Someone hurts your feelings. Someone does something rude. Someone does something unkind. Our response ought to be, I'm not going to do that to someone else. I'm not going to do that. Romans 12 verse 10. Be kindly affectionate one to another with brotherly love and honor, preferring one another. Again, we said at a minimum you have to put them at your level, but the Bible teaches us that we're to prefer others. But we don't do that by nature. You're not going to just wake up tomorrow morning and decide to do that. It's going to take the work of God. What Christ states in this verse is really an extraordinary and remarkable statement. It would cure all relational problems. If both parties obeyed Matthew 7:12, problems are gone. Problems are gone. Relationships are fixed. Again, Christ spoke these words for us to carry them out. It's to be our practice with regard to others. You can take all the good books that have been written upon human relationships. Not all books written about human relationships are good, but some of them are. Many of them are. You can take all the good books written upon the subject of morality and all other subjects that deal with the problems that enter into human relationships. And they all can be reduced down to what Christ says here in Matthew 7, verse 12. Christ says it all. And again, most problems between individuals would never occur if this principle were carried out. It's a preventative. Again, as we said last week, you don't want someone to steal from you. So if you obey Matthew 7, verse 12, guess what? You don't steal. You don't steal. You don't commit acts of immorality or unkindness or rudeness or backbiting or fault-finding or unforgiveness. So again, we could only imagine a church, a home, a community, a nation where everybody lived by this principle. But again, the problem is this principle goes against every fiber of our depraved nature. Goes against it. So how is it possible for us to implement Matthew 7:12? Goes back to what we said earlier. Start with God. That's where you have to start. That's the only way that you can implement this principle, is start with God. To start with God means that God must be real in our lives. God is relevant in our lives. God is the subject. He's the center of what we do, what we think, what we seek. That's what it means to start with God. It means God's the source. We draw from Him the ability to live Matthew 7, verse 12. He's the authority. His government, His claims, His boundaries, His standards are to be recognized, are to be submitted to. That's the only way that we can live Matthew 7, verse 12. But what a wonderful life principle. What a life-changing, world-changing principle it is that we see here. Next week we'll move on to verses 13. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us in a verse of song, we'll all